Well, that's a problem. This video is sponsored by KiwiCo. Most of you have probably been blessed by the image of an anglerfish at some point in your lives. If not, there you go. You've probably also heard about ice fishing. Now imagine ice fishing for a giant anglerfish. Imagine further still, a giant anglerfish ice fishing for you. That's the project I'm working on today. Here I came up with a quick sketch on my iPad and really pushed my digital art skills to their limits. And the idea for this project was from a suggestion from a viewer, so shout out to Marit for that. The first step in the process was to slice up this loaf of clay into more manageable pieces that could be fed through my clay pasta roller, which will soften and thin them evenly. I ran it all through a few more times than I needed to because this is genuinely a very nice experience. The armature, or core of this fish, is a blob of foil, which is pretty straightforward. I grabbed this little guy to make sure that the sizing was correct. Not that scale accuracy is ever a consideration for wildlife in the wild imaginary West, but I just didn't want it to be too big. I took my thin rolled out layers of clay and wrapped them around the foil blob, giving it a little bit more structure. They were pretty thin layers, so I had to add a few of them. I made some clay ropes, which I wrapped around the mouth, bulking up the lips, and the lower lip needed a lot more work before it was ready to be considered an anglerfish lip. They have quite a substantial underbite. As I sculpted this thing, it kind of took on the appearance of a blended mix between a largemouth bass and an anglerfish, which is okay by me because this is a lake anglerfish, not a deep sea anglerfish. After smoothing out the surface with some isopropyl alcohol, I added some fins, and then I used whatever tool this is to gouge out some eye sockets, which was very satisfying. And of course, I also added a dinky little tail. I'll be the first to tell you that this thing looks pretty goofy without eyes or teeth, but just wait till he's got a mouth of off-whites. I made some tiny teeth by rolling out little pointy wormy dealies, shout out to Adam, and then I sliced those in half. And I would not recommend ever cutting things in the palm of your hand, but in my case, the dull was very knife. I said that incorrectly on purpose. Either way, I ended up with a tray full of teeth and 2 eyes which were ready to be baked. Of course, alongside the fish as well. The next step was to install the eyes, which were a little too buggy at first because I didn't make those sockets deep enough, so I cut those eyeballs in half, and then they sat a lot more naturally. I then pulled out my pin vise and drilled a collection of holes around the mouth, which will be filled with all my nice, now very firm, pointy noodles. Being so thin, the clay becomes kind of brittle, and I broke a couple teeth. Luckily, I made a lot of extras. He was looking pretty good at this point, but he was definitely missing the thing that makes him an anglerfish and sets him apart from other fish. The thing that sets fishermen apart from other men. A fishing rod. I delicately lobotomized the little guy with my rotary tool to allow for a pathway for the tube that will get the wires to the light. I found a little copper tube that was just the right size. I cut that to length and bent it into the shape I was looking for. That also got a layer of clay to blend it into the rest of the fish, and then it went into the oven. While I was cooking, I brought my kiddo into the studio to introduce him to the creatures of the deep sea with the help of this week's sponsor, KiwiCo. My kid loves KiwiCo, and so do I. They make a wide variety of toys and products that encourage creativity, learning, and exploration. This anglerfish puppet, for instance, came with some awesome educational cards about life in the deep sea. Along with the anglerfish, we were sent this sensory sand shaved ice maker. We had a lot of fun learning how it worked together. He was particularly impressed with the strawberries. As we played with and enjoyed this new activity, we discovered that anglerfish also enjoy shaved ice with strawberries. Although the puppet may have gotten a little carried away. Oh, we'll fix it. KiwiCo's catalog has items for children of all ages, and for adults as well. This globe, for instance, was a really fun project to put together. In fact, everything I've put together from KiwiCo has been enjoyable, and multiple of the things that they have sent me, I have used for creative inspiration for projects of my own. And my guess is that that would be the same for you and your kids as well. If you're looking for a good gift idea that will encourage creativity and learning, You should go to kiwico.com/boileye and enter the code BOILEYE at checkout for 50% off your first monthly crate. Thank you, KiwiCo, for sponsoring today's video. The next step in the process was to create a mold that will house all of the resin for our lake and keep it in place while it cures. I bought a couple of these sheets of acrylic. I cut those down to shape, and I put them together to find a box that seemed about the right size. I peeled off the protective film and got the thing glued together using some Super Gold CA glue, or foam safe super glue in the vernacular. The reason for this is that it doesn't fog up the acrylic like normal super glue would. For anyone out there looking to do larger resin pours like this one and hoping to learn from my mistakes, one thing I would suggest is to keep the box together using super glue, which is relatively easy to pull apart. And then use silicone for all of the seams. That way, when you go to separate it, unlike if you had used a plastic cement or something like that, it will actually come apart. And if you use hot glue, you run into the issue of the heat of the exothermic reaction actually melting the glue, causing the mold to fail. So this is the method that I have found the most success with, but the best advice is just not to work with volumes this big. That silicone is going to take a good 24 hours to cure fully, so let's jump over to these characters and do some painting. I'll be priming with a rusty red primer from Vallejo in the airbrush. In the comments, multiple people have suggested that I stop priming everything black to get a little more life out of my paint jobs, and that has proven to be true, so thank you for those comments. I'm not going to stop using black entirely for priming, and some things do look better base coated in black, but expanding the color variety and options is always a good thing. Also, if you'll notice the toothbrush head on my rinsing pot for quickly cleaning the needle, that's a great idea that I found online. I don't remember where. I feel bad about that, but thank you to whoever came up with that. After the red base coat was dry, I gave a coat of lighter pinker red to the underbelly of the beast, and then some darker warm glazes over top. The inside of the mouth got a pinky mauve, and then it was time to break out the wet palette to paint on the details. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this anglerfish looks a little odd compared to its deep sea cousin, maybe a little bit more elongated and bass-like, but that is by design. I did do that intentionally. Some of the lakes in the wild imaginary West are large enough to be home to these type of fish who can go deep enough to eat fish during the day, and they come up to the surface to fish for other things by night. During the wintertime, the lake angler positions itself just below the surface of the lake to get its lure frozen through the ice on purpose. Uses its body heat to keep that spot thinner than the surrounding ice, popping up and down every now and then to prevent it from getting too thick, in order that it can break through when it wants to. Uses the bright, enticing, almost hypnotizing blue glow from the lure to attract creatures that are wandering near the lake shore. After the fish, I painted up our unfortunately curious victim here, who's got that mean Elmer Fudd walk going. He was in the right pose to be wandering out on the ice in the pursuit of a mysterious blue glow. At the end, he'll be positioned just far enough out of reach that he may have a split second to react and escape, but I'm really not sure what the outcome's going to be. Off camera, I gave the fish a protective coat of varnish, because it will be submerged in liquid resin, and then it was time to figure out the light. I found this flexible LED noodle, which was perfect. To get it to hold its shape, I wrapped it in a piece of clear heat shrink. And last week I said I ran out of blue filaments, and if you're wondering, well, hey, why do you have another blue filament? I actually filmed this first. Next, I ran 2 wires through the conduit, through the rod, and through the rest of the anglerfish's body, and then I soldered my filament to the wires. I insulated the connection on one of those wires. Didn't have enough space inside to do both, but now at least they will not be rubbing against each other and shorting out the circuit. To give the light a more organic appearance, I hit it with some layers of hot glue to create a bit of a bulb, and let's see how that looks. The fish was done, and we were almost ready to pour some resin. But first, I attached a little resin rod to the bottom of the fish. This will hold it to the bottom of the tank. I drilled a hole for the wires to pass through. And once that was in place, I used some UV resin to patch up that hole so it did not leak. And then I tied off the rod to either side of the tank to keep him nice and level. With that, all of the prep work was done, and it was time to pour some resin. I broke out my deep pour 2-part epoxy resin, and I got ready to mix. But first, I made sure to get some accurate measurements of the tank for the volume. I'm encouraged now that I feel a lot less worked up and fewer butterflies when preparing to pour resin. I'm a lot more confident in the process that I've figured out. I also just built up a tolerance for when things go wrong. Part of that, though, is having a mental checklist of things to minimize unexpected failure points. Things still fail in unexpected ways, but at least they're less of a surprise than they used to be. I wanted to go darker and more opaque in color than I did. In the past, I have tried to recreate the realistic lack of clarity that many types of water have, but I often overdo that, and while it may look very realistic, you can sometimes not see the thing that's hidden in the resin. So I avoided that this time by just going lighter and clearer. After part A and part B and the pigments had all been mixed together, I threw it in my vacuum pot for the degassing process, which is always fun to watch. That process is very helpful in removing all the micro bubbles that have the potential of expanding while the resin heats up and ruining the project, which has definitely happened to me before. I started pouring against the fish to minimize the bubbles, but once it got too deep, it didn't really make a difference. Luckily, all of those came to the surface, but I was met with one unexpected issue, and that is that the eye had a leak. At this point, I couldn't do anything about it, so I just had to hope that it would eventually get filled up with resin and stop making bubbles. But I checked the light to make sure it was working one last time before letting that cure. 3 days later, it had cured, and it did get a little hot, causing it to shrink a little bit, which was most noticeable in the corners, but that was nothing that a little bit of UV resin couldn't quickly fix, and the change in the coloration will not be too noticeable. After those corners had been patched up and cured, I removed the string, because this fish is definitely not going anywhere, and then it was time for the ice. For this round of resin, I made it a little more opaque by adding a drop of white dye. This stuff is incredibly potent. That'll come back to bite me in a second, along with some ice blue. Mixed that up, and then I poured it on top. I didn't degas this round because I knew at this volume it was very unlikely to overheat. All of those little bubbles would also be very close to the surface and poppable with a torch. Right here you can see me starting to question whether the ice layer was icy enough and whether I should add another drop of pigment to make it more icy. I double, triple, quadruple changed my mind on this one, and then finally, threw caution to the wind, made a impulsive decision to add a drop. And then here you can see me trying to correct that because it was the wrong choice. I tried soaking up the pigment with a paper towel, which didn't work at all, so I just ended up dumping it all out and using more of the original color. Thankfully, I had mixed up way more of that than I needed. I left that round for another 3 days to cure, and when I came back to it, something had gone terribly wrong. I used that cloudy resin to replenish my rock collection, and one of the rock molds had a rip in it that I had forgotten about, so that leaked all over my hobby mat and onto my project. Thankfully, I had it sitting on a second acrylic sheet to protect the wires, so it didn't affect the diorama at all. So I guess the key to beating unexpected mishaps is to be more unexpected yourself. Because of how hot the first round of resin got, the acrylic became really brittle and was snapping as I tried to remove it. So in order to actually get it off, I had to use a heat gun and gently peel it off, which took a long time, but eventually I did get everything off cleanly. Once all of those panels had been peeled away, I actually took a moment to look at the top of the diorama, and that is the appropriate level of spooky. Next, I broke out my X-Acto knife and I made some hairline cracks in the ice, which is something that was characteristic of ice in the reference photos that I looked at. Finally, I lightly sprinkled on some frosty white snow effects, which I cleared away gently from the mouth area using an airbrush. and I sealed that down with isopropyl alcohol and a watered down white glue mix. After that, I glued our little friend in place, and I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.